Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. See, we've got some people connected. All right, we had people waiting, that was great. Excuse me. All right, let's dive into this. I'm excited to talk to you about the latest stuff that we've got going in our new release. Just to double check, somebody throw in chat if you can hear me at this point. Just let me know that everything's working. And if everything's going, we'll dive into this. Okay, sweet. Now, of course, you can always watch the replay. This will get posted to the channel after we're done. But let's get started. I want to show you what we've been working on. And for those that are new to Bastille, this will also kind of have a refresher on just how to get started. So we'll talk about some of the new features, how to get started, and walk through building some containers from start to finish. And as a bonus, even maybe apply some templates to them as well. So, hi, my name is Krister. I'm the creator of Bastille. We've had, of course, a lot of contributions from people around the world, so I haven't built all of it, but it was my idea to start with. It's been something that I've been working on for quite a while. At this point, it's been public for a number of years, and even before that, I was kind of evolving the ideas behind it, you know. So let me get started here, and we'll dive into this presentation. Again, welcome. I'm really glad that everyone has shown up, and I think I might do more of these in the future. This actually has been kind of fun putting this together, and I think there's a lot more that I could share about Bastille, to be honest. Okay, let's dive in. First of all, before I get into any of the cool features and the stuff that we've been working on, I just want to throw this out. If you want to come help us build this, we can use some help. Open source projects can always use help. It's usually just a handful of people working on it in their spare time. There's some CI/CD stuff that I'd really like to kind of finish and get working the way that I'd like. If you have experience doing CI/CD, please reach out if you want to help us out with this. Documentation can always use a little bit of work, so if you want to help with that, right, come help us build this. We'd be happy to have you. We have a Discord where we hang out, and you can find us there. Here's a little snapshot of where we've had contributors so far. So west coast to the east coast of the United States, Canada, Puerto Rico, Colombia, all over Europe, Russia, and even Nigeria just a couple months ago. So I do notice that there's some empty spots on this map. I'd like to fill those in. I really want Bastille to be a worldwide project, a collaborative project with as many people involved as have something to share. So if you're in any of these other places, right, come help us out, come work with us. I'm sure there's some more that could go on this map, but not everybody has their location info public, so I don't really, I can look through the pull requests, and these are the ones that I found in there, but I'm sure there's more. I just don't know exactly where they are. I found this the other day. I thought this was nice. I love everything the Bastille team does. Great tools, great doc, and they're so engaged. I saw this on Reddit. I try to be engaged. I'm excited about this project, and I think a lot of other people kind of are too. And I try to get out there and share it and do stuff, like this live stream. Right? Let's talk about what we're working on. It's fun and exciting. So I'm glad to see some other people recognize that. Here's a little timeline of where we've been coming from. The first release that I had was back in 2018. It was it's very basic. It didn't have nearly the functionality that we have now, but it was at least good enough to make public and see what some people could do with it. We went through an alpha stage, and then we're still in a beta stage now, but we spent most of 2019, I think, building up a lot of the core functionality and expanding the support for the things that Bastille could do, leveraging features on the FreeBSD platform. 2020, I think, was a lot more with some of the automation and the Bastille file configuration management kind of syntax. And then this last year, we added a bunch of support for Linux. So you can create an Ubuntu container on your FreeBSD system using Bastille. This is actually a piece, the Linux piece is a big contribution from the community. I didn't have a lot to do with that. I mean, I approved it and I've gone through it and I know how it works and everything, but I didn't write a lot of that. People contributed that. So thanks goes out to the people who worked on it and tested it and contributed to the project. And again, if you have things that you think would be helpful to other people, please let us know, and you can contribute as well and see, perhaps something you wrote will be in the next release. That'd be kind of cool. Here's kind of our stats on GitHub right now. 474 stars, 70 forks. We've had 34 people contribute to the code as far as like getting a merge into the project through a pull request. We'd like to see these go up. If you haven't started the project on GitHub, take a minute and go give it a star. I would only say fork it if you've got some work to do on it. Right? But if you've got patches or if you have suggestions or fixes, you can let us know. And again, all the code is on GitHub, so you can fork it there and do a pull request, and we'll work with you on that. Okay, so what's new in our latest release? 0.9, 2021, 12/25. So Christmas Day release is about 5 months of development. Previous to this release, our last release was the Bastille Day release, which would have been July 14th. So the time in between now and then. So we've added improvements to the Linux container support. We added Debian Bullseye since the last release. The previous versions were already supported before. We fixed those up a little bit, improved it a little bit, and then also added Debian Bullseye. There's been some improvements to the VNET virtual networking stuff. There's a new option with Create now that if you use a -B like beta instead of V like victory, you can give it the name of a bridge that you already have and attach it to that bridge. So it's a little more flexible now in terms of using a bridge that you've created and have set up in a certain way versus using the kind of just default Bastille bridge that we create to try to keep things kind of simple. Finally, there's been some updates to the template system. Most of the templates are usually stored in Git repos. So someone's submitted an update where you can run Bastille update templates like a keyword, and it will go through the Git repos and update them and grab the latest changes in the template repositories. There's a handful of other changes that went into this release as well. I didn't try to put everything on the slide, but there's also a new option to the package subcommand where you can tell it to use the host package manager instead of the package manager inside the jail. Let's see. Some other updates and improvements. Oh, there was a change in this release, I guess, that I'll also call out. The Bastille config had an update, and it removed the default time zone, which by default we were just setting it to UTC. So the change in the code now, if that field is empty, it will just use the time zone of the host. So if the host is configured in a time zone that you want the jails to match, you can just leave that field empty, and they will just inherit the time zone that the host is using. If you want to set it to a different time zone than the host, then you can update that in the config and set the time zone value in the Bastille config, and the jails will use that time zone instead of the host time zone. So a handful of things here and there. Of course, as I mentioned, like most open source projects, this is a handful of people working on it in their spare time, and we all have other jobs and other things going on and pandemic life and all of that. So it's about 5 months of work, and I think it seems like we're getting to a fairly regular cadence now where it's maybe about every 6 months or so we have a release. I don't have any firm timelines on that, right? This is not like a fixed release model or something, but that just seems to be the way that they're coming out, like we work on it for a little bit, we have a release, and we work on it a little bit more and have another one. But I think with as much as the core functionality is now in place and the things that most people need are now there, I don't want to say that development has slowed down, but it's not at that earlier kind of real innovative pace like when we were in 2019, 2020, where let's keep adding this and I need that and this, you know what I mean? I think at this point it's matured enough to reach a wide enough audience that we're not still adding a lot on a regular basis. At this point, we're maturing it. We're kind of, massaging it into just that right, just the best way that we want it to be. Okay. So at this point, I want to kind of do a review of getting started with Bastille for those people that might be new to it or might be using this to see, hey, what is this all about? How does this work? So I'll have some demos in here, but basically these are the 4 steps that you can kind of remember if you want to get started with Bastille. First, you would install it, then you configure it, you set up the configuration the way you want it, then you bootstrap the releases that you want, and then you create containers. So I'll go over each of these steps, but these are kind of the steps that I go through. I set up a new machine, okay, I install it, I set up the config, I do a bootstrap, and then I start creating. This just makes sure that things are going to be working the way that you want them to, and these should be the steps that you go through. Like if you try to create before you bootstrap, it's not going to work, But this is kind of just the 4 basic steps to get started with Bastille containers. All right. First of all, again, you just install it. Bastille is available via binary package format. It's in ports, and it's also on GitHub. I'll actually talk about how to install it from each of those different places. In the ports tree, it's at sysutils/Bastille. So you would do like a make install in that directory. Package install Bastille, of course, to get the latest binary package. And then you can also just install from the Git repo using the make file. And this Git method is, let's see, the Git method is actually one that I use quite a bit. I think I generally intended this one for like developers and people who want to test the latest stuff, that kind of thing. But you can also use this as a regular install method. It's actually I think it's fairly clean. you can do a make install and a make uninstall and remove it cleanly. It's not going to leave a mess. But this way, if you use the Git method, you can track the latest changes in GitHub and just install them kind of as they come in, and you don't have to wait for a new release. Again, I generally intend that for developers, or sometimes I'll suggest somebody use that as a method to work around an issue that hasn't been fixed in a package yet, or in like a formal release. But I should say that with the disclaimer of, like, sometimes a change might get in that will cause an issue for you, and if you're using the bleeding edge stuff, right, that could also bite you as well. But honestly, sometimes I switch between the Git method and the package method back and forth, and I really haven't had issues with any conflicts or something like that. I can do a make uninstall on the Git stuff, install the package again. The config is still where it needs to be, and everything still works. Okay. Let me do a little demo of this. Let me switch this over to my console. And I think I still had that installed there. Okay. So again, for the package installation, just do package install Bastille. I hit yes, and now it's installed. I can run this package info-l on a package. For those that might not have used that before, this will show you a listing of everything that's in the package. So this shows me everything that was installed. Our package is pretty small. Looks like the flat size for the package is 200K. So you've got a container manager that can do a whole bunch of stuff. I think it's pretty feature rich at this point. And we could fit this multiple times on a floppy disk from the 90s, which I think is, personally, I think that's pretty impressive. An example of the Git method, it looks like I have the latest changes here. But if I dump out the make file, you can see that it's just going to copy this directory in. That directory has all the files in it in the right path. And there's also the uninstall target where it will go remove all of those pieces. It does not remove the config. I see that on this last line here. You may need to manually remove that. But we don't want to clobber a config by mistake, but this allows you to kind of switch back and forth between them. But if I do make install here, it installs basically in the same method that the package does, but it just uses whatever was the latest in Git instead of what's been packaged on the machine. So I guess I don't have the ports tree checked out on that machine, so I won't demo building it from the ports. But again, those are the primary methods. You do a package install, or you pull it in from Git. The one other call out that I guess I would make about the binary packages is you might need to check your repository to see if you're connected to quarterly or latest. Right? There's the two repositories in BSD. So you might get a different version if you're on the quarterly versus the latest release, but that's kind of up to you to check. Okay, so that's install. Again, after install comes configure. You just primarily review the Bastille config for your preferred settings and make sure that you have the host firewall configured. The firewall is, I'll demonstrate it here, but it's also available in the README for the documentation. So if you need to configure that, you can copy paste it from there and throw it in. This is actually a piece that I've been thinking about automating a little bit more. perhaps with a prompt to the user, and it says, hey, we can see you don't have a firewall. Would you like us to make one for you? And then you can hit yes, and it will set up the firewall for you. Historically, I haven't done that automatically because I didn't want to clobber anyone's firewalls. They're already there, you know. I'm really kind of cautious about, you know, making any kind of issues to someone else's machines or making assumptions about someone else's machines and causing breakage or anything. But I think perhaps in the next release we can have this automated where the firewall will just set up for you, and you don't have to do that piece. Here, I would say, are probably the top 4 things that people might change in the config. You might want to configure the time zone. Again, I called that out when we were talking about the changes in the release. Configuring the default time zone, either inherit it from the host or set your own. I think one of the most important pieces in the config is defining the storage and where you want the jails to be created. So that usually means enabling ZFS and setting the Z pool that you want it to use. Again, this isn't automatic because I don't want to make assumptions about your storage setup or what Z pool you might want to use. Some people have a number of different Z pools, and I don't, you know, there's no way for me to know which one it should be set up to use. So we just ask that you go in the config and just set it once, right? You install it, you set it, and then you never have to mess with it again. As far as the network, you can set the default interface that you want the jails to be connected to when they're created. You can define a default route if you have if you're using VNET and you want your containers to get a default route when they start up. You can set what that default route is in the config, and also you can customize what the default templates should be. So I think this was a change last year. When a new container is created, it will start up automatically and then have a template applied to it to configure it with our base configuration. You can customize what template that is. If you want a certain template applied to all your systems when they start up, you can create a template and set it in the config and say apply this one every time they start, or not every time they start, every time we create a new one. And once we've created it, apply this, and then they're ready to go. It's kind of an automatic config management thing. So these would be the core things that you would set, and I'll show you what these look like in the config in just a minute. This is what the firewall looks like, and this is how you would set up the basic firewall and network settings for the containers. So from the little comment at the top in this box at the top here, this is the pf.conf. So you set the external interface. I have a little note there that says update this per host, because each host might have a different interface name. So in my example and on my machine, it's RE0, but on your machine it might be something else. You would need to change that and make that match what your external interface is, the interface that actually connects to the internet and has, you know, outbound access. Then we've got some really kind of simple firewall kind of policy definitions, simple stuff. And then it's kind of the second block of 3 lines that allows the allows connectivity for the jails. So we create a table called jails, and that table persists. And then when a jail is created, its IP is added to that table, and then that's how the access gets tracked. And then there's the line to NAT. So do a network address translation on the external interface from the jails table to any destination, and it lets it go out. Finally, that RDR anchor line is what allows us to do port redirects from the host into the container. So you can redirect port, 443 from your host into the container, or 80, 880, whatever you want it to do. But that line is what allows it to do that. And then just some basic firewall lines of block all other incoming traffic and let traffic out go. Again, I would say if you're setting up, I would recommend configuring the firewall based on the example in the README and not this example on the slide. I noticed this example doesn't have a line to allow SSH in, so if you're doing this remotely, that would lock you out. Again, I just wanted to show the key points of the firewall rules. If you have an existing firewall, you can just merge the key changes into your own. And if you're creating a new one, again, I would say go copy paste it from the README, change the interface, and then you're set up. This second code block on here are the steps that I use to configure the host interface. So I create a cloned loopback interface called LO1, and then I rename LO1 to Bastille 0. The service netif clone up will bring up any cloned interfaces, and then we have the pf enable to enable the firewall, and then start the firewall. So this is all kind of just a one-time thing. When I first set up a host, I configure the firewall, I set up the interface, I start it all up, and then I never have to do this stuff again. It's just set up the way it needs to be set up, and I go on and I create containers and do everything else. So there is, I suppose, a little bit of initial setup step, but as I said, I think maybe in the next release we'll try to automate some more of this where possible. But if you already have a firewall, it would kind of bail out and say, hey, you need to merge this in. I'm not going to try to do that. I don't want to break your firewall by just making some assumptions. So let me switch over and do a demo here. And let's look at what the config looks like and the stuff that you would want to specifically look at. Okay. I'm going to open the Bastille config. So it just looks a little something like this. It's got some default paths for where the binary should go and where all the different components of it should go. As far as I'm aware, not a lot of people change this stuff, but if you find a reason to, you can change it there. But starting down about here, I would say this is about where people might start to make some customizations. This Bootstrap archives config value defines what components of FreeBSD are fetched and exported into your release that you bootstrap. So by default, we just need base. We can run and we can create these with just base. But if you want lib32 for like 32-bit binary stuff, you could add lib32 here. So I can do like that. And then when I do a bootstrap, it will download both of those components and extract both of those pieces, and then my releases will have both of those archives. There's a list kind of just right up here, right? This is the commented example of what else you could put in there. But you could add ports. If you want ports in your release, you could add it there, source, test, and so on. Again, if you don't know that you need anything more, you probably don't. I guess this is a safe way to think about it. But base by default, and then if you know you need more, you can add the more there. Now, you need to do this before you do the bootstrap, or else the bootstrap will just get the 1, and then when you try to do it again, it'll say, oh, we're already bootstrapped, you know? So make that change beforehand, and then it will start up the way that you want, or at least do the task the way you want the first time. Second, again, here's the time zone data. If this is empty, it will use the time zone from the host. If you want to change it to something else, you can, do something like that and set it to UTC or whatever different time zone they might want to use. Right here, this says that we'll use the resolve conf, so the DNS settings from the host, and copy those in to the containers. If you want to use a different file, you could just make a different, a different resolve conf somewhere in a different path and set it here. And all your containers would use that one if that's something you wanted to do. Bastille supports FreeBSD, hardened BSD, and Midnight BSD. So all of their URLs are here, so we know where to fetch those. And then here we have the ZFS options. These two are generally empty by default. We don't assume that you want ZFS, and we don't know what your Z pool might be. So in this case, I've changed this to yes, and I set my Z pool, and those are pretty much just the two values that you need to update. If you don't want to use ZFS, just leave them empty, and it will just, it won't create any ZFS volumes or anything. It will just create some directories and put files in there, and that will work. I've definitely run Bastille on UFS for quite some time, but then you'll lose out on some of the benefits of ZFS, like snapshotting, and it's a little easier to do imports and exports on ZFS volumes and stuff than UFS would need, like a compress archive kind of thing. So set those. Below here, these are probably kind of optional to ever mess with. When we do an export of a container, you can stop a container and export it and kind of like it's like making a backup, I suppose. But you could also take that file to another machine and import it, and now the container is moved to another machine. This just sets like the default compression options and stuff, and how verbose they should be. If you have strong opinions about that, you could change those, but otherwise, I don't think I've ever messed with those after we created that stuff, to be honest. Here in the networking, I set Bastille 0 as the default loopback interface. So that's the one that I want my containers attached to if I don't specify something different. So in this case, I can create a container and I don't have to specify an interface name. We'll use this interface. If I create a VNet container, it will use this gateway, is what I have configured in my case. So I can support both types. I have some containers that attach to a Bastille interface, and some containers that attach to a VNet and to a bridge and go out to my local network. And I can kind of set configuration for both of them here in the same place. All right, and then lastly, we have the default template stuff. So this is the default base template, and then if you create a thick jail or versus a thin jail versus a VNet, they would all have a different path to a template. So if you want to customize how a certain type of container is templated, you can set the default template here in the config. Okay, so those are the things that I would update in the config. And then, and then again, here's an example of the firewall on this machine. So I have the external interface configured, the simple policy stuff, the 3 lines that really give connectivity to my containers with the table, NAT, and RDR anchor lines. And then this actually has the more full example. So I also am allowing traffic in on port 22 for SSH. If I'm configuring this machine remotely, I need to make sure I can get back in over SSH, or else I'll lock myself out. And then that second line allows traffic from my Prometheus metric scraping. I have dashboards for all my systems to track their health and you know, what's going on and everything. So 9100 and 9124 are for the node exporter and the inetd Prometheus sysctl exporter. So I grab my metrics from there. So again, that's the basic network configuration. And the basic things you need to config before you get started. And again, I know some of this config is like, well, that's going to take me, you know, it's going to take me a couple minutes to set that up. But you just do it once, and then you never have to do it again. So everything else after that is just the fun part of creating containers and building things, and not just setting things up. Okay, now that we've configured things the way we want, and we have like ZFS enabled and the zpool set up and everything, we will bootstrap the release. So the release acts as the foundation to your container and all of your containers. And so you have to pull down the release first, and then you can build containers based on that release. I like to think of it like this. Like, to build great things, you need a solid foundation. So the release is the foundation of our containers, and we apply that first, and then we can build stacks and stacks of containers on top of those, and everything will work the way that we want. Okay. Again, here's some example commands for bootstrapping a release. Again, we support FreeBSD and experimentally some Linux containers. Also, HardenedBSD, again, of course, and MidnightBSD. So to bootstrap these, I would do Bastille Bootstrap 13.0 release, and it would grab 13.0 release for me based on the Bootstrap archives I have configured. Download those pieces, extract them into the release directory, and get me set up to build containers. I will call out that the bootstrap command has always been intended to be one of the first things that's ever executed by Bastille, and it does a lot of stand-up for your system. Like, the bootstrap command is what initially creates all the ZFS volumes that you want it to set up, and kind of puts all the files and directories in place for creating the jails directory and the logs directory and the releases and cache and all that kind of stuff. So again, you configure it first, and then bootstrap is the next thing you do that sets up everything else. You just need to tell it a release name. Now, of course, if you're on HardenedBSD, your release name will look different. It will match whatever HardenedBSD's release names look like. I don't remember off the top of my head. Or the same for MidnightBSD. And then for Linux, you give it the code name of the release. A long time ago, when I was a younger man, I was an Ubuntu user and a Debian user, and the release code names were like, you know, that's a fun part of like how they do it, whatever. But after moving pretty much to BSD and getting out of that world, I realized that focal and bullseye don't mean anything to anybody except for the people that use that distro, you know? I always have to look up what version is focal, what version is buster, what version is stretch, like, you know? But that's the name that they just use for everything. I think maybe I kind of like how BSD just has a release version, and I know what the version is, and I don't have to go check is focal before, well, dang it, and now I don't even remember what the other one is, right? You have to remember these code names, and if you're not part of that club, the code names are sometimes hard to remember. So, again, the Bootstrap a Linux release, you just give it that Linux release code name, and it will pull it down that way. So I will demo that for everyone as well. Let me switch over here. First, I'm going to do this Bastille list releases. I'll show you that I have 13.0 release already done. So let me just pull in like 12.2 or something just to demo it. And also, if you didn't know about this, you can add update at the end of it, and it will download the archive from the FreeBSD mirrors, but then it will also run FreeBSD update on that newly extracted release. So hopefully you'll start out with the latest patches before you even create any containers. So we see there that it bootstrapped 12.2. It grabbed the download manifest and let me scroll this back up if I can. A lot of updates. Okay. Oh, of course it brought me back down. Maybe I'll let it finish. There we go. Now it's finished. Let me scroll back up and we'll look through this output for a second. Okay. So it validated the checksum for 12.2. So it grabbed the base archive, compared it to the manifest checksum, made sure that, okay, these match, it looks like it's the valid archive, and then it extracts it. And this is bootstrap successful. You can see -- help for a bunch of new options. But because I added update on the end there, it also grabs all the patches. So it took me from 12.2 release all the way up to patch set 11. So it had all these patches to it, a bunch of certificate stuff, and then patches to a bunch of binaries, some more cert, looks like cert stuff, and time zone update. And then it says 12.2 is getting old, you might want to upgrade. Okay, all right, I got it. So now if I do list release or list releases, I know those would work actually. Oops. Now I have 12.2 and I have 13. Okay. So now when we get to the create section, I could create containers that are either 12.2 or containers that are 13. And you can run both at the same time, and you can have a mix. The only limitation is you can't run containers of a newer version than the host. So while it would be really nice to be able to test, 14 on a stable 13 host, I can't do that. But I could run 13 or 12, 11. If I have some super old legacy stuff, I can put those all in there and still run older versions on a newer system. So let me grab a Linux release too. So let's do Ubuntu Focal. Now, if this is the first time that you've done this, it will prompt you for a couple of things. Hey, you're going to need a couple of stuff, or a couple of config items set up for this to work properly. Do you want me to do that for you? So we'll add these. We need the deb bootstrap package as well. So it will download that for me through my package manager. 26, 27, okay. And then it will start using deb bootstrap to go grab all of the required packages for Ubuntu Focal. And this usually takes a little bit of time, depending on your internet speed, of course, and the state of the tubes between you and the Ubuntu repos. But this will pull everything down, and then you can create things using these gathered packages. This shouldn't. I've got pretty good internet, so this shouldn't take too much longer. But this does take a little bit more time than bootstrapping a FreeBSD release. And primarily that's because base is something like 300 megs, and it doesn't take that long to download it as a single archive. Let's see. Okay, keep going. You got it. pop back here while I wait for that to finish, and I'll check on chat. Yeah, somebody calls out that all the release code names for Debian they come from Toy Story. They're all characters from the Toy Story movies. Ubuntu's just like come from, I think, what's his name? Mark Shuttleworth that just announces the code names for the Ubuntu stuff when they decide on those. Sometimes they've had some weird names, or, well, I don't know. Again, feels like being in the club versus not in the club, and whatever that difference looks like. Let's see. Okay, looks like this is finished. So Bootstrap successful. Now if I Bastille list releases, I see I have an Ubuntu 2004. Okay, so now I could build things from that if I wanted to. I won't get to that yet, but this is just a demo of the bootstrapping stuff. But that's how you would bootstrap the latest Ubuntu. And again, to bootstrap the latest Debian, you would say Bastille Bootstrap Bullseye or Buster or Stretch if you want to get some of the older ones. And then you can build using those releases. Okay, so now we're finally about to the point where we can create our containers. Again, everything up to now, I would say, is like a one-time step. You know, you install it once, you configure it once, you bootstrap your releases about once, and then all the other fun is in creating these and messing around, you know? So this is finally where we create them, and these are like repeatable steps that we would, you know, create this one and that one and 3, 4, 5 of these and experiment with software. But before now, you do all of this just once, and then the create, everything happens after that. And I will demo creating a handful of different containers and point a couple things out about them. I want to call out that there's a few different container types. We have thick and thin containers, and I'll actually point out what that actually means. But the core difference is that in a thin container, which is the default type, it uses a shared copy of that bootstrapped release, but it mounts the base operating system of the release as read-only. So no container can interact or interfere with another container by altering anything in the base. And I find this to be the most secure default and the easiest way to keep your containers updated. If you apply an update to the release that is shared by a dozen containers, all dozen containers are now automatically upgraded. So you can patch all of them by just patching in one place because they share that base, but they use it read-only. You can do what's called a thick, and what that basically means is you have a read-write base, you have your own unique copy of the base release. So when you create a thick jail, it basically does a copy from the release that we just bootstrapped and dumps it into the jail directory. And it has its own version, and you can upgrade this independent of anything else or not upgrade it independent of anything else. VNET, Linux, or empty, those are also three other types. I would say the Linux stuff is still a little bit experimental. There's still some commands that I find that don't work inside of the Linux container, but a lot of stuff that does work. So that's still kind of, you know, everyone's figuring out how much works, how much doesn't. The VNet virtual network stack, talked a little bit about that with the network in the network portion. If you want to do more advanced networking, that's how you need to do that. But you need to decide what container type you want to use before you create it, or when you create it, you have to define what the type is. So that's why I call these out. So for this, I'm just going to demo a bunch of creation, and you just get an idea for what that looks like. So I'm going to create one called Alcatraz. So this is creating a new container. I give it the name, first of all, right? And then I tell it the release that I want it to be based on. This is the foundation that we're going to build this container with. I assign it an IP address and attach it to an interface. Now, because I have Bastille 0 in my config, I can take that off and it will default to that. So I don't have to specify it, but I can. But let me create this. Okay, created, and now it shows we've created it. It starts it. When it says created here, that means that we've started that container. And then we apply the default template to it, and looks like it restarts it afterwards. And now we have a new container. Oops. So I've got some other containers already on this machine, of course. But we have our new container here. And it shows us this info. For those that might not have seen, we also have a -A option. I think this came out in the last release over the summer, I want to say, or maybe it was before that. Sometimes it's hard to remember. This shows a little bit more detail than the standard list command. So you can see whether it's up or down. You can see any published ports. You can see what release that it's based on and stuff. So now we see that new container. So something I want to call out. I'm just doing a ZFS listing on the Bastille storage and each of my containers. So I can see for all the containers I have running on the system, I'm using 27 gigs, but I see that over half of that is my Prometheus container, and perhaps I should go purge some of the old metrics data that I have that's probably 3 years old and I don't need anymore, but I'll get around to that later. Looks like my web server jail, this Nginx one that hosts some websites for me, is at 6 gigs. My database one is at 3. Graphon is using less than a gig. I have an endless SSH tar pit running in a container. That's kind of like a science experiment, a little bit of experimentation. That's only using a few hundred megs. But this is what I want to call out about the thin containers and the default container size. This brand new container that I just made is using 5 megabytes of disk space. Like, it doesn't take up hardly any room at all. 5 megabytes for a brand new container, because we're sharing the base release. It doesn't have to take up much space at all. So all of these start out very small, and then you just build up from there. But even my AdGuard DNS server that runs on this in this container is only 300 megs. So most of these containers are not very big. Some of these, this web server I've had for honestly for years, and it hosts like 50 domains. So 6.7 gigs is like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But a lot of these other ones, this is fairly small, and you can export that and share it to another machine fairly easily. Now let's create another one, but this time we'll do it with the -T, and this will tell it to make it thick. And mostly, again, that just means copy the whole release into it instead of sharing it with everyone else. So we'll create this one. Again, there's a little notice here. This might take a little while. This will always take a little bit longer than the other one, because the other one just creates some mount points and then starts it up. In this one, we got to copy a whole bunch of files in before we start it up. So, okay. Looks like the copy is done. Then it does the default template. Now we have our new container here. Now let's just do another comparison here. So the thin one was 5.5 megs. This one is just under 500. So it's almost 10 times as big if you want a full copy of base inside your container versus share it with another container. So just keep that in mind. If you have a reason to create, one of these thick jails, the one of them that has the full copy in it, do that. If you don't have a reason that you can think of why you would need to do that, then, don't bother doing that and save some space, I guess. Let's see. Let me create a Linux container now. So because we've bootstrapped the focal release, I can also create a Linux container. That's done with this -L, right? So no option, we'll just use the defaults. -T will make it a thick size jail. -L will make it a Linux jail. And again, I can specify the interface or not, but if I don't, it will just use the default. So when I create one of these, it goes to that archive of packages that we grabbed with the deb bootstrap, and then starts extracting everything into where it needs to go. So this takes another minute too. Again, bootstrapping FreeBSD and creating FreeBSD containers is always going to be faster than bootstrapping and creating Linux containers, just based on how it works and how things are kind of packaged. But after this gets through extracting everything, we'll be able to create, or we'll be able to use this Linux container. You notice there's a whole bunch of warnings on here, pre-dependency problem, but we can safely ignore all of this. Basically, we're just telling it, go extract everything, put it where it needs to go, and then in the end, it will all work. I know it's like we're extracting this before this other thing, but who cares? In this case, it's actually it'll all work out in the end. Don't worry about it. But instead of just one archive like we have in FreeBSD, there's a whole bunch of deb packages that we've got to all extract when we do these. So this will take just another minute. I don't recall this taking as long as the bootstrap, but it definitely takes longer than creating a FreeBSD container. So just let this finish up here. Come on, you can do it. I believe in you. I think it's almost there. Okay. Again, the Linux stuff I would still consider a little bit experimental. So this process is maybe not as polished as it could be. This maybe is a place where somebody watching has some ideas for improving it or speeding it up or polishing it, so it's kind of like a little bit more robust. This could be a place where we do some of that. Okay, I see a bunch of Python packages. Linux loves to include Python with everything. Systemd. Nothing like systemd to cause internet flame wars, right? I don't believe systemd is going to work properly in this container, but that's, I think, another story. Time zone data. Almost there. Maybe at this point this has taken longer than Bootstrap. I can't tell. Sometimes it feels like it's going quick, and then sometimes I wonder if it's still responding. Vim, whiptail, users. Come on, you got this. Well, if it's done unpacking and it's just setting up, then I imagine that's progress. This should be finished here. Just a second. Come on. Setting up more Python. It is very exciting, I know. I thought about just pre-creating some of these, but I think there's something to be said for the demo. You see the process end to end. But yeah, it's very exciting creating some of these Linux ones because you got to sit and wait for it to extract the whole time. I think the FreeBSD thin container is created in under a second, for whatever that's worth. But again, that's mostly setting up some mount points and turning it on. I think we did a pretty good job in that case. I was honestly surprised when I went back and I saw a brand new container is about 5 megabytes. I was like, oh, okay, that's not bad. For a little while, I was running a DNS server, and I set the ZFS quota on that jail to 25 megabytes, and it ran a full internet service providing DNS with only 25 megs of total storage used, which I thought, okay, we're doing something right here. Oh, come on. Now it's back to unpacking and preparing. Thought we were past this, guy. Okay, at this point I do think it's taken longer to extract than Bootstrap. But if you really want to experiment with Linux containers, this is what it takes. To be honest, most of my containers are all still FreeBSD containers. If you notice from that Bastille list that I did before, everything's just up to date on 13, and I run my web servers, DNS server, SSH tar pit, science experiments, and all of that on 13. Personally, I haven't had a lot of need to try to run Linux binaries, so I haven't needed a lot, to use these Linux containers. But it seems like people in the community have had need for it, so we're also supporting it. But I haven't done a whole lot with these other than just some basic experimentation. Start them up, get them to work, take a look, poke around a little bit. So, oh boy. Are we going to be finished already? I feel like it's unpacked locales before. Or maybe I'm just, this all feels like deja vu watching it. I feel like I've seen this package extracted before. Come on. Yeah, the possibilities for the Linux container stuff are exciting. There's a lot of stuff that we could potentially do that could be cool. I saw a post on, I think it was on Reddit, just the other day about creating CH roots on FreeBSD. So not quite the same jail stuff, but similar-ish, in order to pull down Linux web browsers and use those as your web browser. But I think we could do the same thing in the jail, without that much trouble. Um, yeah, I see some other stuff in chat about like a pi hole. Yeah, I think a pi hole is great. I've run a pi hole before, but getting to work on FreeBSD was like a giant pain in the butt. Um, so I switched to AdGuard, and I think it does just as good of a job. It has a nice UI, and it's packaged for FreeBSD, and we have a template for it. Let's go grab the AdGuard template, create a container, you're done. I think it's pretty smooth. Again, Pi-hole is pretty great. I just wish it was packaged differently so it would be easier for us to use too. But AdGuard so far has been working really well. If I make some changes to my stream here, I could maybe even show my AdGuard dashboard. I'm actually waiting on it to get pushed through ports and get added to ports, but I submitted a new package for an AdGuard exporter for Prometheus. So I use the AdGuard, and then it exports all my metrics to me, and I have a nice dashboard that shows me response times and total ads blocked and total domains queried and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty nice. Although I guess I admit I've been nerding out a little bit on Grafana dashboards and doing stuff with all my metrics that I've gathered. Well, would you look at that? It's finally done. Looks like it also even reached out and tried to check for updates when it finally finished. If I do this -A here again, now I've got Ubuntu test. It's up. It has an IP. Looks like it didn't detect the release in this case, but that's again the experimental part of the Linux stuff. If I console into it, I get the normal prompt of like logging into a Linux machine. Ubuntu 20.04 LTS on this version. Hey, cool, great. This is based on Bullseye SID, and I can see what's running in here, and I can, so now I have a Linux container. Again, experimental, play around, see what you can do. Let's see how this evolves. I'm excited to see what people end up building with it, what kind of things they're able to figure out. Again, personally, I haven't had a lot of need to try to run Linux binaries. FreeBSD seems to have everything that I want to be able to use, as far as my servers and my containers go. But if other people have good ideas, let's see what those are. I'm always curious to see what people create using these tools. Okay, so that's how we would create them. We stand them up. We create thin ones, thick ones, Linux ones, VNet ones, right, depending on what your needs are. I wanted to throw a little bonus material on here as well and talk about the template system. I mentioned briefly that when we create a container, it applies a default template. Well, let's take a second just to see what these templates look like and apply some for practice. So a template uses what's called a Bastille file. This is kind of the same concept as like a Vagrant file or a Docker file or something like that, right? So you put some instructions in a file and it reads those instructions and sets things up for you. So inside of the Bastille file, you can do any of these things. You can install packages, run arbitrary commands, toggle the sysrc, right? Enable things, disable things, set flags and stuff. Manage the services, redirect ports in the firewall, set hardware limits like resource controls, and say this container can only use 1 gig of RAM and this much CPU time and so on. Anything that's in the RCTL resource control, like man page, you can look through there and we have got support for all of that. Um, Other things that are supported: mounting and unmounting storage. So maybe you mount some storage from the host, copy some files in, maybe unmount it when it's done, or mount some storage to the container so it has access to it. This is something that I do, for example, on another machine. I have a Plex media server container, and I mount my movies and stuff to the Plex, but I mount that storage read-only, so Plex can read it and serve it to me, but it can't, the container can't change any of the storage. I can clone containers, so I can create one, set up the way I want, create a clone of it, distribute that somewhere else. Customize the jail configs, copy files, and more. The more kind of points to just about anything that you would run on the command line, Bastille package, Bastille copy, whatever. Anything that's supported in the Bastille help, you can probably put in a Bastille file and execute. Now, I say probably because there's a couple things that don't really work. Like you wouldn't do, I don't think you would do a Bootstrap in there, or you wouldn't do a create in there. But if it targets a container, if the command targets a running container, you could put it in a Bastille file and automate everything that it does. So here's an example of what a template file would look like, and I purposely went out and found one that's a little bit more complex, just to showcase some of the more detailed options and stuff that you could use. So this one will set up a Gitia or Git, however you say it, Gitty server. So you can, kind of like your own private GitHub, just using this software. You can define arguments that will be accepted in the template, and you just define those in here, and then you can use the subcommands like you would use on the command line. So package Git would install that package, and then cp user / this would copy everything that's in the user directory from this template into root, and that usually is what throws like config files in place and template files and stuff. The render command, this is the one place that I suppose the templates is a little different than just the common command line output. But rendering a file path will go look in that file path for certain variables and replace those variables. So in this case, these arguments that we define, like the secret key and the internal token and stuff, those are in that config, and when we render the config, it changes the variable into the value. So this allows you to make your configs kind of dynamic. Like if you have the same config you want to apply across a bunch of different machines, but they all have different IPs or something, you can use the jail IP arg and render that, and it will replace that variable with the values from the variable. So we're going to run a command and set the permissions on this directory. We're going to enable the service. We start the service, and then just for fun, we run a command and we echo and show us what the return code was. Just I want to see that all worked. But then I could apply it using this command here at the bottom. So Bastille template, and then of course you would replace target with the name of the container you want this to apply to. So if we were going to apply it to one of ours, we'd put Alcatraz there or something, right? And it would target that container. And then the path to the template. And in this case, we give it those 3 args. We say, we want you to take these arguments. And in this case, it generates a 16, 32, and 64 character string based on just random OpenSSL output. And it throws those into that rendered config file. And those populate what those secret keys and tokens and stuff are. Those can safely just be random things. They just need to be unique. So we just auto-generate some, and then everything works. So sometimes the templates that you'll see online are fairly simple, Like they might just be 3 or 4 lines, right? Install something, copy the config, enable it, turn it on. Okay, sure. And if that's all you actually need, then great. If you need to be a little more complex, you can do something like this, and do a little bit more advanced stuff. Let's see, I see a question in the chat about the render. You know, I think I'd have to look at the code to double check for sure. I think it uses like a sed and looks for the variable and replaces it with the actual value. To be honest, I think I might have to look at the code to see exactly how it's doing it. It's been long enough since I worked on that I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But basically, it's just the variables in the config. I'll just throw this in. They just look something like that, like jailIP in curly brackets, like a shell variable, and that will automatically translate to the jail's IP. We have some built-in ones. jailIP and jailname are built-in variables that you can put in a file and render using that syntax. And then some of these args and stuff, they're not built in, but you can define whatever you want and have it render those values inside the file as well. So let me do a demo of this template and then we'll wrap this up. So I can do a list templates, and this will show me all the templates that I have. I have actually been doing some work on, I realize this will be a little bit of a breaking change, possibly for people who already have templates. But I have been experimenting with consolidating all of the templates into one place and mimicking the way that the ports tree looks. So I could just apply the template www/nginx, and it's in that path, right? Like this. I've got a template in here. Since we first created the templates, we would just like create a Git repo, and it has a template in it, and we'd pull down, and you'd have a bunch of different directories with templates in it. You know, like I'd have some from this repo and from this repo and so on. So I'm experimenting with putting these all in one repository, checking them. You just check it out once, you have all of them, and then you can apply whichever's you need. In that situation of having them all in one place, I think I would recommend just creating a subdirectory with like your username or your team name or whatever you want to use, and put your custom templates in there, and then we can have both still kind of side by side. But the difficulty has been cloning a Git repo in the same place that another, in a non-empty directory with other stuff in it, and it causes some conflicts. But anyhow, that's why my Bastille list templates is quite long. It's because I have them kind of all in a slightly different directory structure. But if I wanted to make, let's see, what was that first one we created? Alcatraz? If I wanted to make Alcatraz an Nginx web server, oops, I can just do like this, and it will read through that Bastille file and follow those instructions and set up that container for me. So first of all, it installs Nginx. It looks like it copies a config in. It enables Nginx here. It looks like this command is probably an nginx-t, like to test the config. And then we start it up. So let me just check that. If I check sockstat in that container, or PS in that container, I see that Nginx is now up and running. It's listening on port 80. I could connect to this container and I could, interact with it with that service. So again, the templates are just, we're going to follow these simple instructions and set this up for you. The hope with the templates is to just kind of finish that last mile, Like, hey, I need a MySQL database container. Great, create a container and apply the MySQL template, and now you have a MySQL database container. It took care of all the little steps in between installing, configuring, enabling, turning on, there's all that extra kind of additional steps that usually come up when setting these up. So let me try another one. I have a Plex Media Server template. I'm going to apply that to this other container, right? And you see these kind of basically work the same way, but I apply the template to the container and it goes through the steps and applies these. This one will take probably a little bit more than the Nginx did, but that looks like that's done now. Now another thing you can do is, I want to see what this template does before I do it. You can use this verify command and give it a path to a template, and it will say, okay, I detected a Bastille file, here's what it looks like. It's going to do these things. So when you pull down templates, you can check them, see what it is that they're going to do before you do it. Do the same for the Plex, right? So, it looks like the Plex file is using the legacy hook format instead of the Bastille file. I'm working on consolidating everything and getting it to the new format. But technically with this old syntax, it found a file called pkg, and inside of there it had a list of the packages it needed, and it found a file called sysrc, and it's going to do this. And so these same things would happen, just in a slightly different format. But it's just following instructions to configure something for you, and that's really all we want it to do, right? We want it to do the automation, like, here, just create this, get it done, and then I don't have to, I don't have to do those extra pieces. And I think it's also nice for people to be able to develop software, develop containers, and kind of package it up. Here's the Bastille file to rebuild this if you want to build it on your own, And then I can just copy that, apply the template, and I'm done. I don't have to do the work to set that up in a way that I would traditionally have to do. Okay, with that, that's all I had for the demo today. Looks like we're coming in on about 90 minutes for this, so a little bit more than I planned on. I mean, it's fine for me, but I think, you know what? I think what the culprit is, it's those Linux containers, right? The bootstrapping and the creating the Linux containers took more time than I expected. So anyhow, that's what we have for today. That's kind of a review of how Bastille works, how you create stuff, apply templates, do the bootstrapping and everything. Demoed a couple of the new features, not everything, but I'll leave some of it up to you to kind of play around with, right? You can explore on your own a little bit as well. I think I could just throw it out here. I had enough fun preparing for this and interacting with everybody today that I think we might do this again. So watch our Twitter feed. We're going to announce some more of these videos, and we'll do some on, I'm sure we'll do some on Bastille, but also I'd like to just do some on like general FreeBSD, how FreeBSD works, getting started with that, and get some more people excited about all these projects. So thanks for coming in. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel. You get notices when we'll do some more of these videos. I know we did some early on, and then we took a break, but I'd like to get started and do some more of these now. So, cool. Everybody, thanks for coming. See you next time. And let us know what you're doing with Bastille. I want to see it. Thanks.